This conference will now be recorded.
Chaturmukha Samarambham Vakbhadacharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryandam Vande Guru Parambaram Ragadirogan Sadadanushaktan Asheshakaya Prasrudan Asheshan Avsukya Moha Aradidan Jakhana Yopurva Vaidyaya Namostu Tasmai. Namaskaram all. We were discussing about the contribution of Panja Mahabhutas or Panjabhutas in the Dravya Nishpati. So, Kshmam Adhishtaya Jayade Ambuyoni Agni Pavana Nabhasam Samavayataha Tan Nirvrittihi Visheshascha Vyapadeshastu Bhuyasa. That is what we were seeing in our last session. Vyapadeshaha. Vyapadeshaha means name. Bhuyasa, Bhuyastvam. By the cause, by reason, by virtue, or because of Bhuyastvam, the Dravya gains its Vyapadesha, name. So, we will be seeing in this chapter later that the Dravya is divided into 5 categories, and we call them as this is a Parthiva Dravya, this is an Apya Dravya, this is an Abhasa Dravya, like that. So when we attend to this particular categorization, this sort of a naming that this is a Parthiva Dravya, here it is told that Vyabadeshastu Bhuyasa, Bhuyasa Vyabadeshatvam. So when we say, when somebody says that this is a Parthiva Dravya, do not think that this is a Dravya made out of Prithvi. It has got all the 5 bhudas in it. It is Panjabhudatmagam, like any other Dravya. This Parthiva Dravya is also Panjabhudatmagam. That is what we learned. Panjabhudatmagam Tattu. But it has got a Bhuyastvam, dominance, and that is emphatically mentioned by that Avyayam. Tu. Vyabadeshaha tu. So there is no any other reason for that. Bhuyastvam. Bhuyastvam of what? Bhuyastvam of Bhuda. So when we say that a Dravya is Parthiva, it means that this has got the predominance of Prithvi and not that this is made entirely out of Prithvi. But at the same time, we mentioned in one of our earlier lessons in this chapter that all Dravyas can be considered as Parthiva, because Prithvi is the Upadanam for all Dravyas. So is there a contradiction in this statement? There is no contradiction actually. We were mentioning, we were specifying that all Dravyas may be considered as Parthiva because the Sharira or the Murti, Sharira or Murti of any Dravya is a contribution of Prithvi. That is why we mentioned that okay, any Dravya can be considered Parthiva. Then there is a question actually, there is a Purva Paksham. Then why should we consider the Bhuyastvam of other Bhudas? That is a normal question. when we say that, okay, all dravyas have Prithvi as the Upadanam, the Murti, the Shariram of all dravyas are the contribution of Prithvi, it means that it is Prithvi which makes a dravya Murtam, manifested, or in some other words, it is the Chakshusham. That is a word called Chakshusham, something which yields to the Chakshus, Netrendriya. We earlier we saw that Charaka mentions Gharatvam as the Lakshana of Prithvi. This Gharatvam, it is important. This Gharatvam makes a Dravya Nibidam. Nibidam. What is the meaning of Nibidam? Nibidam means something like maybe dense or impervious, or in simple terms, thick. Something which makes it thick and hard. Something which is impenetrable. So that Nibidada, that is very important. Actually, in some other situations, this Kharatvam is used to mention the roughness. But here it is not the roughness, but here it is the sort of becoming solidified, becoming hardened, becoming dense. That is the meaning of this Kharatvam of Prithvi. If you look at Sangraha, we will see the word Kadhinyam of Prithvi, Kadhinyam. So altogether, when we mention about the Prithvi or Parthiva, that Nibidada or that dense nature, that represents or that reflects the effort with which a particular dravya can be penetrated. So if the effort required to penetrate a particular dravya is more, that means it is more nibida. It is more dense, it is more impervious, it is more thick and hard. So this involvement or contribution of Prithvi, that makes the dravya more nibida. And another word that we mentioned is Murtam, which is making the dravya Murtam. Murtada is actually a representation of the sort of grossness, Sthulata. So these two things, they are very important when you try to understand the nature of a Parthiva dravya. These two natures, the two features, that means Nibidada and Murtada. Nibidada and Murtada. So these two features of a dravya, any dravya, can be considered as the dominance of Prithvi in its manifestation. The dominance of Prithvi Bhuta in its manifestation. Especially the Nibida. Nibidada is that impenetrability. That is very important. Similarly, when we come to the maybe an Apya Dravya, we will come to the finer aspects later. I'm just mentioning or detailing the concept of that Vyapadesastu Bhuyasa. So with that concept, when we come to a Apya Dravya, that is spinning around a word called Dravatvam. The focus is Dravatvam. And that Dravatvam reflects the dominance of Jala or up. So in such dravyas where this Dravatva is the dominating factor, you should understand that the Jala Bhuda, which is supposed to be the yoni in the Dravya Nishpatti, is more prominent than the Upadana. That means the Prithvi itself. The yoni predominates over the Upadana. That is how a Dravya is becoming an Apya Dravya. Dravam, Dravatvam is the dominant. Dravam has got many shades of meaning. Of course, they are all interconnected, like to flow or to spread fast or to melt or to continue to be in a liquid state. All these are the meanings of the word called drava. And also we should visualize or we should envisage the word or the concept of sneha also. We explained it when we saw the statement that ambuyoni sneham churnadi pindi bhava heduhu gunaha sneha jalamatra vrittihi. So that sneham means a dravya or the property which helps the particular dravya to be in moist or wet state in its own and to make others wet or moist. That is what we call as the sneha property in it. That is jalamatravritti. That is jalamatravritti. So when this sneha and dravatva dominates in a dravya, they are known as apya dravya. And in one point is very important. That is very important understanding in the entire Dravyadi Vidnyani. Even in a apya dravya where Jala dominates over the Upadana or all other four dhadus, sorry, bhudas, and where the Dravatva and the Sneha are the dominating characters, still, as far as that particular Dravya is concerned, whatever Nibidada that particular Dravya is having, whatever nibidada that particular dravya is having is definitely an attribute of the prithvi in it. I hope you understood. Even in an apya dravya, the nibidada of that particular dravya is an attribute of the prithvi in it. That is very important. Similarly, when we come to an Agneya Dravya, then what happens? The Agneyata, the warmth, Ushnam, Ushnatvam, the heat, the capacity to provide heat, that dominates. Agnihi Pachati. So that element within that particular Dravya, which has got the capacity to bring about Pachana within, that dominates over the rest of the bhutas. That is how we understand that this dravya is an Agneya dravya, and that will be deciding the entire characteristics of that particular dravya. As I mentioned in the earlier example, even in such a Agneya dravya, we should understand that, okay, its snehamsha, if it has got some snigdhada in it, obviously that will be the contribution of the apya or the up bhuda in it. Similarly, whatever nibidada or murtada that dravya is having, that will be a contribution of the prithvi in it. So each bhuda will be delivering its individual functions whichever the dravya is, but still there will be a dominance, and vyapadesastu bhuyasa, the naming of that particular dravya will be based on that dominance. Similarly, we should understand about what is happening in Vayavya Dravya. In Vayavya Dravya, the dominance is for the Vayu Bhuta. And obviously, what will be the dominating characteristic? It will be Chalatva. We saw it, Gharadrava Chaloshnatvam Bhujalanila Tejasam Agashasya Pradikha. So here it will be the Chalatvam, which is going to be the dominating trait of a Vayavya Dravya. So how does it work within the Dravya? Because of this Vayavya nature of the Dravya, so Chalatva, how does it, how it is going to influence? It provides better freedom of movement within as far as the kanas, the particles of the Adhisthana is concerned. So in a Vayavya Dravya, the particles, the units or the kanas of the Prithvi enjoys an enhanced, comparatively enhanced level of Chalatvam within. That is very important. So obviously what happens? Such a Dravya will have less Nibidada, less dense. Again, further we move to the next Dravya, that is a Nabhasa Dravya or an Agashiya Dravya. What happens? Agasha is the dominating Bhuta. So what happens? The kanas of the Adhisthana and the space that they deserve within. And when we make a comparison between these two, that means the total number of the kanas involved and the avagasham, the space allocated for that kanas. When we make a comparison, we can assume that the avagasham will be too much when compared with the number of kanas of the Adhisthana. Number of kanas of the Adhisthana will be minimal, whereas the space provided for them will be too much, excessive. So what happens? That Dravya will be having very prominent anibidada, not nibidada, anibidada. And what will be the result? That Dravyam will have very less density in it. So what happens? That is having some sort of a apradikadam. Agashasya apradikadaha. Apradikadaha means alpa pradikadaha. So an Agashiya Dravyam will be having very minimal pradikadam. Apradikadatvam. So when we say the statement that vyapadesastu bhuyasa, all these ideas about the Dravya should come to our mind. All the ideas surrounding this Dravya composition should be coming to our minds. Okay, so that is the importance of vyapadesastu bhuyasa. So I mentioned that this is a type of naming, vyapadeshaha, naming of a Dravya. But actually, this is not just about the naming of a Dravya, but it is more about a method of division of Dravyas. It's not just about a naming of a Dravya, it is more about a method of classifying the Dravyas, all the Karya Dravyas. It is a method of classification of all Karya Dravyas. Okay, we will find this idea is very important and discussed through the length and breadth of most of the samhitas, sometimes very obvious and sometimes in a hidden manner. When we look at the Sushruta Samhita, we mentioned it in our previous session. I think, if I remember it right, Sushruta says tatra पृथिव्यप्तेजो वायु आकाशानां समुदायाद् द्रव्याभिनिर्वृत्तिः. तत्र पृथिव्यप्तेजो वायु आकाशानां समुदायाद् द्रव्याभिनिर्वृत्तिः. उत्कर्षः तु अभिव्यञ्जकः भवति. That is the point. उत्कर्षः तु अभिव्यञ्जकः भवति. इदं पार्थिवम् idamapyam, idam taijasam, idam vayavyam, idam agashiyam iti. That is how Sushruta documents this idea. Similarly, Sangraha, in Ashtanga Sangraha, we will find Ulkarshena tu Vyapadesha. The word used is Ulkarsham. In Rasavaisheshika, I mentioned something about Rasavaisheshika in our earlier sessions as well. Rasavaisheshika will tell us Samakhya Punaha Uchrayena. The word used is Uchray. So Uchrayam, Ulkarsham, Bhuyastvam, all these are having almost same meaning in this context. So in short, I think when we look into the type of a dravya, we should have all these ideas in our mind before jumping into conclusions. That is very important. What is the relevance? Actually, this is something like the Ayurvedic way of understanding dravya, but it is not something like a Swatantra Siddhanta. This is not a Swatantra Siddhanta. Ayurveda adopted these concepts from other Shastras. But when we come to our application point, I think this is becoming very, very important. Because you see, when one of our very basic concept, which helps us in identifying the nidana of arogya, nidana of roga. Similarly, the sadhana for arogya and the sadhana for roga, or whatever it is, we are moving around, or we are focusing more about the so-called Vimshadi gunas, which are otherwise known as Sharira gunas. They are Sharira gunas. And it is based on that particular point that we say Vruddhis Samanai Sarvesham Viparidair Viparyayaha. And there are important connecting links between the Jiva Sharira, the living body, and the environment or the nature outside. Logam. Ahara sambhavam vastu. Yogascha ahara sambhava. Or something like guna dravyeshu yejoktaha ta eva tanudoshayoho. Guna dravyeshu yechoktaha ta eva tanudoshayoho. That is how the Loka and the Purusha are connected. Human body and the environment, human body and the nature, how they are connected. Actually, it is nothing like duels. You cannot think about a human body which is outside the so-called prapancha or the nature. It is a part of it. It is a very member which constitutes the prapancha. So obviously there is no reason for finding the sharira as a different entity from the prapancha. There is no scope for such a consideration. So obviously that should be, the prapancha should be, the loga should be reflecting assets in the sharira also. So while we are saying that, okay, panchabhutatmakam tattu, shariram also should be panchabhutatmakam. No excuse, no, there is no space for a different argument in this regard. But then what is the difference? We divide the entire dravyas into two basic categories like sachetanam and achetanam. Sendriyam chaitanam dravyam nirindriyam achetanam. And that indriyam, actually it is not just about the organs of sensory perception, but it is about samanaska satma sendriya sharira. Samanaska satma sendriya sharira. And this indriyam, shariram and manas, they are achedanam in the absence of atma. So the chaitanyam part is a contribution of atma. So practically a ajiva shariram and a sajiva shariram, the difference is the presence of the chetana, the presence of atma. That is why we say that the purusha is shaddhaduga. That means panchabhuta plus atma. So in that aspect as well, there are panchabhutas which is going to make the sharira, the sthula sharira as such. So in such a sthula sharira also, we should be able to make out, okay, these are the parthiva portions, these are the apya portions, these are the agneya contribution. That idea is very well explained in the sharira sthana. That is why the sharira is becoming one of the most essential component of Ayurvedic learning. The sharira, what we find in our sharira sthana, is not about the primitive anatomy and the physiology concepts that the Indians had. It is not like that. That they are the essential concepts with which the principles and practice of Ayurveda are bridged. They are not about the primitive anatomy. They are not about the primitive physiology. So when we go to the Sharira Sthana, we find Tatra Ghad Ghani Dehesmin Shrotram Shabdo Viviktada. Shrotram Shabdo Viviktada. Vadad Sparshatva Guchwasa. Vanhe Drugruba Paktaya. Apya Jihva Rasakleda. Gandhasti parthivam. Anga vibhagam sharira. Sharira sthanam, 3rd chapter. Everybody knows it. Tatra ghat ghani dehesmin shrotram shabdo viviktada vadad sparishatva guchwasaha vanhehe drugrupa paktayah apya jihva rasakledaha ghana gandhasti parthivam. So when we say, when we understand that, okay, panchabhutatmagam tattukshmam adhisthaya jayade ambuyoni agnipavananabhasam samavayataha tannirvrittihi visheshascha, these ideas also should be read together. Then only we will get the connection between the achetana prapancham and the sachetana shariram. That is how you are able to use an achetana dravya as ahara or aushadha in a sachetana sharira. That is very, very important. I'm not going to explain all these tatra ghat dhani dehesmin shrotram shabdo viviktada. I'm not going to the fine details of all those aspects because it is there in the text very clearly. But it should be definitely read parallel to or simultaneously with this understanding of Dravyadi Vidnyani. Okay, then at one point in our last session also we mentioned that idi bhudamayo deha. Idi bhudamayo deha. And further, I think we find in the textbook, the next line is Tasmad naigarasam dravyam bhuta sanghada sambhavad. That is what we find as the next sloga bhagam in our chapter. Tasmad naigarasam dravyam bhuta sanghada sambhavad. Let us see what the Acharya is trying to explain here. Tasman naigarasam dravyam bhuta sanghada sambhavad. Tasmad bhuta sanghada sambhavad dravyam egarasam na bhavati. Tasmad bhuta sanghada sambhavad dravyam egarasam na bhavati. Tasmad, so because of the type of bhuta sanghada sambhavatvam, what we were explaining here, bhuta sanghada sambhavam, sambhavam manifestation, sanghadam the combination, the type of combination that we were explaining of what, of bhuta. So together bhuta sanghada sambhavam. Because of this sort of bhuta sanghada sambhavatvam of a dravya, as we were explaining, as we were seeing, you cannot expect a dravya as ekarasam. You cannot expect any dravya as ekarasam. This is what we find as the message here. Let us see what is the importance of this mentioning. Let us see. We have seen that, okay, dravyam is panjabhautikam. Dravyam is panjabhautikam. And the dravya is having different components of identity. Any dravya is having different components of identity in it. Yasmin rasadayaha. We mentioned it in one of our previous session. Yasmin rasadayaha yacha bhautigim murtim asridam tadravyam. So that rasadayaha, it has got rasa in it, it has got guna, it has got virya, it has got vipaga, it has got prabhava. So all the dravyam ashraya lakshanam panjana. Dravyam ashraya lakshanam panjanam. There are 5 main components which is to be understood when we learn, when we understand a dravya. These 5 components give the identity to any dravya. So here we find only rasam. Tasmad naiga rasam dravyam. Rasam is highlighted because of the importance of the component called rasa. Rasa is always considered as very important as far as the understanding of a dravya is concerned. So we will explain everything taking rasa as an example. That's all. So this rasa is situated in the dravya. Actually, I do not know whether situated is the right word to express it, because it is, yeah, okay, for 2 reasons. The main reason is that my English is not very good. And the second reason is that many Sanskrit words are not properly translatable. So together, I think I am trying to express in the best way that I can possible. I do not know whether I communicate it right or not. So this rasam is there in the dravya, situated in the dravya. And we should understand that rasam is an outcome of Panchabhuta Sanghadam. All rasa, any rasa is an outcome of Panchabhuta Sanghadam. And they are 6 in number. Rasas are 6 in number. Also, we know that rasa is a Vishesha Guna of Jala. And also, maybe, of course, it is situated Ega Guna Vruddhyanvaya Pare. According, as per that role, as per that concept, rasa is there in Prithvi also. Ega Guna Vruddhyanvaya. According to, as per that Nyayam, rasam is there in Jala and Prithvi. Then all the Shadrasas, each of the Shadrasas is Panchabhautika. And in each, we attribute or we identify the dominance of two bhudas in each. In the chapter called Rasabhediyam, we find that Kshmambho Agni Kshma Ambuteja Ghavayu Agni Anila Gonilaihi Dvayolbanaihi Kramadbhudaihi Madhuradi Rasodbhavaha. So there is dominance of two bhudas in each rasa. In Charaga, we will find that, okay, Rasanartho Rasaha. Rasa is Rasanartham, Rasanendriyartham. Tasya Dravyamapaha Kshidistatha. Tasya Dravyam is Apaha, up. Tasya Dravyam is Jalam. Tatha Kshidihi. Also Prithvi. That I already mentioned, that Ega Guna Vruddhyanvaya. The next line is Nirvrittauja Vishesheja Pratyaya Ghadayastraya. Nirvrittauja Vishesheja Pratyaya Ghadayastraya. So it is almost same as the Dravya Nishpatti. Rasanartho rasastasya dravyamapaha kshidistatha. So initially we mentioned about Jala and Prithvi. In the Dravya Nishpatti, initially we find Prithvi and Jala. Here it is Jala and Prithvi. And Nirvrittaucha Visheshecha, Tan-nirvritti Visheshascha. That is what we saw in Dravyadi Vidnyaniyam, the Dravya Nishpatti in Ashtanga Hridaya. Here in Rasa Nishpatti, Charaga mentions Nirvrittaucha Visheshecha Pratyaya Ghadayastrayaha. Kha Akasham, Trayaha Kha Agni and Vayu. So Rasam is the Rasanendriyartham, and its Adhara Dravyas are Jala and Bhumi, and in its Vyakti Bhava and Madhuradi Vishesha, the Hetu, there are three Hetus, that means Akashadi, Akasha, Vayu and Agni. So this concept again is important in understanding why this Dravya is like this, or if this Dravya is like this, what all things can we anticipate behind the screen. Sushrita says explains this in a different, slightly same thing, no difference, in a different verse. That's all. That means Saghalu Apyo Rasaha. Saghalu Apyaha Rasaha. So the role of Prithvi is not highlighted. Then he continues. Sheshabhuda Samsargad Vidagdhaha Shodha Vibhajyate. Sheshabhuda Samsargad Vidagdhaha. That Vidagdham, that shows the pagam that is happening within the Dravya, which makes the rasa manifested. So that pagam is continuously happening. Sometimes very, very slow, sometimes very rapid, very fast. Take the example of a mango. When it is very small, it is having kashaya rasa, then it is very fast, it is becoming amla rasa, then very fast it is becoming madhura rasa. So the Agni Pagam Vidagtham, with the participation of the Bhumi, Vayu, Agasha, is happening very fast. The same thing may be happening in a piece of rock, theoretically. But that change may be very, very slow. It may be taking maybe thousands of years. But theoretically, we propose that there is Paga happening, which can bring about a change in the rasa of a rock. Theoretically. So, rasa saghalvapyaha sheshabhuda samsargad vidagthaha shodha vibhajyade. Sushrutam. So what happens? What is the importance of this statement? from whatever we have mentioned here, what we can infer is that in the Dravya there are all the 5 bhutas, and these 5 bhutas with or under the leadership of Jala is undergoing the sort of vidaha, and as a result rasa manifests. So the vidaha is common, the participating bhutas are common, the adhisthana is common. So in short, there is a potential in any dravya to have all the 6 rasas in it. Need not manifest, or we need not perceive it, because again the bhuyastvam brings the experience. Bhuyastvam brings the experience. So we need not perceive that, okay, there are other rasas. Or sometimes they need not manifest. It may remain as latent, just as the potential. That is why Vagbhada makes this statement that Tasman Naigarasam Dravyam Bhuda Sanghada Sambhavad. Tasmad. So it is a generalization from whatever the Purva Acharyas were trying to explain. Tasmad Naigarasam Dravyam Bhuda Sanghada Sambhavad. So in a Dravya which we perceive as Madhura, that means it is a Madhura Rasa Bhuyastvam. There is Madhura Rasa Bhuyastvam, and all the remaining potentials of other rasas to get manifested is covered by the Bhuyastvam of the Madhura, and the others may be very, very feeble, sometimes beyond the level of detection, beyond the level of Indriya Grahanam. So all these things, all these shades of meanings can be perceived from this statement that Tasman Naigarasam Dravyam Bhuta Sanghata Sambhavad. I hope I'm clear. Then from there onwards, it switches over to another point of discussion. What is that? Naiga doshastado rogaha. Na ega doshaha tataha rogaha. Na ega doshaha tataha rogaha. Naiga doshastado rogaha. Tataha rogaha na ega doshaha. Tataha rogaha na ega doshaha. Tataha, as a continuation of whatever we were explaining regarding the Dravya, that is na ega doshaha, na ega rasam dravyam. Further to that, subsequently, we should understand that tataha rogaha na ega doshaha. With the same, consider putting the same logic to this context, we should infer, we should conclude, or we should conceive that rogas, any roga cannot be ega dosha. Rogas are not ega doshas. No roga is derived out of any single dosha. So again, it is a matter of confusion. Lot of contradictions in the first view, because when we are going to the Nidhanasthana and when we start learning different rogas, like say maybe Jwaram, first classification what we see is Vadigat Jwaram, Paitigat Jwaram, Kabhajat Jwaram. So all these things are very well explained, and at this point it is told that Naiga doshas tado roga. How can we understand this sort of conflicting ideas explained in the same textbook by the same author. So here also the bhuyasavypadeshastvam is absorbed for the sake of explanation. That idea is taken into, absorbed into this context as well. So when we understand a particular condition as this is Vadiga Jwaram or this is Paitiga Jwaram, the real idea is that in this particular state of that Vyadhi, Vada dominates over the other two. Adhyay bhava. So how can it be connected with our Dravya Chinta? How can we switch or jump immediately over to the Roga Chinta? That also should be understood. We found that, okay, as Dravya is a product of a Bhuda Sanghadam, there is no chance of a Dravya becoming Egrasam. Then quickly we jumps into the context of dosha and the roga. How can we associate these two concepts? That is very important. As you all recollect, one of the prime ideas that we saw in Ayushkamiyam is Vruddhis Samanai Sarvesham Viparitair Viparyayaha. But interestingly, if you look into that context of explanation, immediately after this Vruddhis Samanai Sarvesham Viparitair Viparyayaha in Ayushkamiyam, the very next explanation is about the detailing of Shadrasa. Not detailing, but the introduction of Shadrasa. And immediately followed by the influence of the rasas on doshas. What is that? Tatradhya marudam dhanandi trayastikta kapam. So vruddhis samane sarvesham viparitair viparyayaha rasa swadum lalavana tiktoshana kashayega shaddravyamasidasteja yatha purvam balavaha tatradhya marudam dhanandi trayastikta kapam. So there also we find the sort of a connection which they are trying to establish between the Vruddhis Samane Sarvesham, Dravya, Rasa and Dosha. And this particular idea, this is very important actually. This is very important idea. I think while going to the finer details of these concepts, we will have to hire ideas from various parts of the chapter of the text. For example, while explaining this relation between the rasa and the dosha, one of the easiest or one of the first ideas that pop up to our consideration is regarding the samanya samprapti. Dosha dushta rasaihi dhadun dushayanti. There we find this relation. Dosha dushta rasaihi. Rasaihi dushtaha doshaha dhadun dushayanti. Similarly, there are many other situations where this interconnectedness is mentioned. If you go to the first chapter of the Charagam Vimanasthan, Rasa Vimanam, you will find a very descriptive picture of this concept. The very chapter begins like Tatradau Rasa Dravya Dosha Vigara Prabhavan Vakshyamaha. Rasa Vimanam. Tatra Adau Rasa Dravya Dosha Vigara Prabhavan Vakshyamaha. I am going to explain Rasa Dravya Dosha Vigara Prabhavas. The Prabhavam which connects this rasam and dravyam and dosham and vikaram. So that is how the Rasavimanam starts. And what is that connectivity? What is that connection? It is a secret measure or a very important measure about understanding of Dravya and understanding of Roga. How to understand a Dravya? By understanding Rasa. Similarly, how to understand a Roga? By understanding Dosha. This is the discussion. When you have a samyak upayoga of rasa, that results in arogya by bringing about dosha samya. When you have a mithyopayoga of rasa, it causes roga by means of dosha vaishamya. Te samyak upayujyamanaha shariram yapayandi mithyobayujyamanaha tu khalu dosha pragopaya upagalpate. Rasavimana. So when we put all these ideas together, that means the rasa, dravya, dosha, roga, prabhavas together, we will get an idea about the importance of proper understanding of all these concepts. Actually, it is Charaka who is trying to explore this point to the subtlest level. Later, we find it in Ashtanga Sangraha. To be very frank and honest, we will not find the sort of detailed description or discourse in Ashtanga Hridaya as we see it in Ashtanga Sangraha or Charaka Samhita. Because in Ashtanga Hridaya it is not intended. He is not planning to make the matters complex. It is more like a practitioner's handbook. So here not a Yadhoktan Saranameva Shreyaha. That is what is intended with the Ashtanga Hridaya. In Charaka Samhita, we will find many complex statements in this regard. I'm not going to the intricacies of such statements like Tatra Khalu Anega Raseshu Dravyeshu Anega Doshatmageshu Cha Vikareshu Rasa Dosha Prabhava Megaidasyena Abhisamikshya Tada Dravya Vikareyoho Prabhava Tattvam Vyavasyed. That is a very strong suggestion, very strong suggestion. Forget it. If you require it, we need another parallel session for learning Charaka Samhita. So in that, what our area of interest is that in that descriptions, Acharya has tried to explain the influence of rasas on doshas very precisely. And interestingly, there are certain statements. Rasa dosha sannipade tu ye rasaha yaihi doshaihi samana gunaha samana guna bhuishtava bhavanti te tan abhivardhayandi. This is an expansion of that vriddhi samane sarvesham vipariter viparyaya. Only after making that statement, Vagbhara introduces rasa and then its influence on Tatradhya Marudam Ghananti. The original context is what we find in Charaka Samhita. Rasa dosha sannipade tu ye rasaha yaihi doshaihi samana gunaha samana guna bhuishtava bhavanti te tan abhivardhayandi viparida gunaha viparida guna bhuishtaha va shamayandi abhyasyamanaha iti. This is going to be the foundation on which the Ayurveda Chikitsa is built. Edad vyavastha hedoh षट्वम् उपदिश्यते रसानां त्रित्वं च दोषाणाम्. एतद् व्यवस्था हेतोः, to make some sort of a vyavasthakaranam of this rasadosha sannipadam, we are going to explain the षट्वम् उपदिश्यते rasanam. Rasas are explained as 6 and tritvam cha doshanam. Doshas are explained as 3. All these things are required. All these things should be there in our background discussions to understand that naiga doshas tado rogaha. So when the dravyas are to be understood as anega rasa yukta, and when we understand that rogas are anega dosha yukta, a finer understanding of the rasa dosha influence, that means which rasa or which rasa samsarga is going to influence which dosha or which dosha samsarga. That is rasa dosha prabhava. That should be explored in the subtlest level possible, taking all possible permutations and combinations. And based on that understanding, you should be able to find a relation, potential relation between dravya vikara. That means bheshaja and vyadhi. Dravyam here explains bheshaja, vikaram is vyadhi. So what could be the possible relation between a particular bheshaja and vyadhi, or which bheshaja should be found as the most influencing one in a given situation of vikara. That is the dravya vikara prabhavam or bheshaja vikara prabhavam. So based on this rasadosha samsarga vishakalanam, we should be able to understand the dravya vikara bandham or bheshaja vikara bandham. So that aspect, as explained by Charaka, is brought into a small capsule. Charaka explains it in a very elaborate canvas. Maybe I think that this could be the sole reason why we say that Charakastu Chikilsite. That elaborate canvas is brought into a very, very small, a nano chip by Vakbhada, by making a statement that Naiga doshas tado roga. Naiga doshas tado roga. Tasman naiga rasam dravyam bhuta sanghata sambhavad naiga doshas tado roga. Charaka is trying to explain this in a very multiple levels and multiple sthanas. At one point in Sutrasthana itself, we find that yes syad rasavigalpatnyaha syatcha dosha vigalpavid. Yes syad rasavigalpatnyaha syatcha dosha vigalpavid sanamuhyed vikaranam hedulingobashandishu. Charakam Sutra. Sana muhyed vikaranam hedulingobashandishu. It is the practical aspect, the applied aspect of understanding this theoretical discourse that we were seeing by understanding the relation between the rasa and dosha and rasa dosha prabhavam and bheshaja vyadhi prabhavam. Again, as I mentioned in our last session, I do not know whether I am making the simple Dravyadi Vidnyaniyam so complex. but with the conviction that none of these participants in this group are just first year students or second year students. I'm trying to explain this considering or visualizing that all are practitioners, all are into the business of chikitsa. So with this I conclude today. The rest of the chapter, maybe the next shloka or whatever it is, we will find in our next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful session. If there are any queries, one or two queries, we can quickly go through them and then we can conclude.
Sir, I have one doubt. Sir, how to differentiate between Chetana and Achetana Dravyas?
Chetana Dravya and Achetana, actually, that question is having some philosophical shades of understanding, because generally, in its gross sense, I think that capacity to respond to the environment, that is the Indriyatva, that is considered as the Chetanatva. So that is one way of explaining it in the simplest way. And those who are having no capacity for that response is known as, so responding to the triggers or stimulus from outside and capacity to not to respond, that makes the difference. But there are some philosophical senses that all objects have got some amount of Chetana in it. As I told earlier, it may be very slow sometimes, it may be so feeble. So even a piece of stone will have some amount of Chetana in it, because it is a part of a cosmic Chetana. So, but it is, see, we are seeing the every object from our perspective. So our scopes and our limitations are all spread into our level of understanding, our level of interpretation. So that way we feel that this is Achetanam and that is Sachetanam. So we are the human beings, we are the interpreters of the universe, and it is our universe. But there are differences in opinion about it. Even the so-called Achetana Dravyas as perceived or are conceived by the human beings, still there could be maybe the subtlest level of Chetana, which may be very slow to respond, which may be very slow to react. So that shade of meaning or that possibility of explaining it also should be understood. Okay.
Sir, I have the doubt that the Achetana Dravya which we perceive, the difference is the Chetana Dravya will have Samanaska Sa Indriya Sa Atma Dravya is Sachetana Dravya. And Achetana Dravya, it is not having, or it is having, we are not able to perceive the Indriya and the Manas, but Atma will be there anyway.
Okay, that is another way of explaining it, that's all. Because see, it is more about that Sharirendriya Sattva Atma Samyoga. But I think again the Chaitanyam is supposed to be an attribute or contribution of Atma. So when
it is Vibhu. That is Vibhu. It is everywhere. No?
Yes. So when it is focused to a particular deha, we call it as a particular jivi or prani or whatever it is. And even when that sort of presence of manas and presence of indriya is not very prominent in it, still the presence of Atma will make it sachetanam. So it need not be having an active Atma, manas and indriya. That is why I say that even in the absence of that manas and indriya, as perceivable to human beings, that should be underlined. Still, there will be a representation of Atma in it, making it Chetanam in the subtlest level, which I already mentioned. But in a gross sense, we conceive or we explain that the presence of Atma is going to be the criterion for Sachetanatva, and that will be well manifested when it is having a Sendriya and Samanaska situation prevailing. Okay.
Yes. Sir, can you just brief Eka Guna Vidnyani Nyaya, sir?
It is again, it is not a Swatantra Siddhanta. It is something about see this when Akasha is having only Shabda Guna, from that Vayu evolves, it will have two gunas, the guna of Akasha plus the Sparsha guna of Vayu. And when Agni comes out of it, it will have the two gunas of the preceding Vayu, Akasham and Vayu, plus the third Vishesha guna like the Rupam. So that Ega Guna Vruddhi Anvayaha Pare. In the Para, the next level, Ega Guna Vruddhi Anvayaha. So whatever was there in the previous gunas, so Bhudas plus its Vishesha guna will be added on. That way, when we reach the Prithvi, it is supposed, but I think there are differences of opinion. This is not accepted by all the schools of philosophy. It is just like, interestingly, as far as Ayurveda is concerned, that level of discussion as it was happening in the darshanas is not beneficial and is not going to make any effective change in the understanding of Ayurvedic principles as well as its application in real life. So I think we don't find much of the involvement of acharyas in that discussion part. But the concept of Ega Guna Vruddhyanvaya is like this only.
Thank you, sir.
I think with this, sir, we can conclude our session today, and we will meet in our next session.
Okay, Shubharatri to all.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you all. Shubharatri to all.